Honorable service.
This flag is presented to you on behalf of a grateful nation.
Ends in disgrace.
I think it's despicable.
As a Wisconsin veteran is left in a funeral home morgue for nearly a year.
That's not how you treat veterans.
This week on Open Record, the VA's apology.
There needs to be a change in the law.
The funeral director's excuse.
I just had that gut feeling that somebody was going to reach out to him.
He did this for you.
It's a crock of
And the FOX6 investigation that led an unclaimed veteran to his final resting place. From the FOX6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson, and I'm here with Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
And we are joined by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs. Welcome back, Jenna.
Thank you.
We are recording this episode on Thursday, November 14th. It's been a little more than a week since Billy Ford, 65-year-old Billy Ford, was laid to rest at Rock Island National Cemetery in Illinois. Ford died at the Madison VA Hospital in November of 2023, and for nearly a year, his body was left in a funeral home cooling system until family contacted the FOX6 investigators for help. How it happened and who is responsible when we come back after this.
Welcome back to Open Record. Billy Ford was a U.S. Marine back in 1976. He died in 2023, but it took a FOX6 investigation to finally get him a funeral and burial with military honors in the National Cemetery. Brian, what prompted you even to just start to look into this story?
You know, we get emails, phone calls, tips of all kinds from time to time, and I was going through a backlog of tips, and this was the first email I clicked on. It was from Nicole Ford, and she said, "My father is a military veteran, and he's been sitting in a funeral home since last November." And this was in October 23rd, roughly, when I opened this email. And I thought, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And she started to explain that there has been a problem with unclaimed veterans not getting to their final resting place within the VA system. And she sent me a link to an Inspector General's report from 2021 that talked about this concern. And immediately bells are going off, and I'm saying Veterans Day is coming up. This is an awful story. I want to get to the bottom of it. So as soon as we received that email, I started making phone calls and said there must be something more to this story. And sure enough, there was.
So you mentioned that Billy Ford was deemed unclaimed. How did that come about? Obviously, his family seems interested in him. They want to see him buried. How was he deemed unclaimed in the first place?
It's a really good question because to be unclaimed means essentially you have no family either around at all who can be located or who's available and able to take your remains. I mean, there are sometimes people who maybe they don't have the money for a funeral or they've been estranged for a long period of time. They're in some circumstance they cannot come claim the body. That wasn't the case here. In fact, Nicole Ford has told me numerous times that she would have brought someone in to claim her father's body, but for how this all unfolded. So in November, it was November 28th, 2023, Billy Ford is at the Madison VA. Now, he spent a lot of his life in Michigan. He ends up in Madison. He's at the VA there. Many of his family members had no idea he was even there. He passes away in VA care, and that's important as this story goes on. He's in the care of the VA. They have a duty under the law to then locate next of kin. And typically, when you're in the hospital, you have someone listed as your contact, as your next of kin. And it is not clear at this point who Billy Ford had listed as his next of kin contact. Whoever it was, Nicole Ford says she never got a phone call. And other family members, those in Michigan, those who ultimately came to his funeral after the story happened, said they never had heard anything from the VA. The VA tells us they followed their standard procedures for contacting next of kin. So there's some uncertainty as to what really happened here. But one thing we know is Nicole Ford, who said she had been in contact with her father off and on throughout his life, and had been in his contacts in the past, says no one reached out to her, so she had no idea he had passed away. Now, that was in November of 2023. So when the VA declares that he is essentially an unclaimed veteran, their next step is they have contractors. They have vendors who help get those remains to a proper burial. And in this case, there's a funeral home called Foster's Funeral and Cremation Services in Madison that is a contracted vendor for the Madison VA hospital. And Madison VA contacted them. They transported the body or came to pick up the body. And then after that, months go by and nothing more had happened.
Is he supposed to be buried right away, or what's supposed to happen when he gets there?
I think the idea, well, first of all, there is always a process to determine that these remains are in fact of a veteran who is eligible for burial in a veteran cemetery, whether that's one of Wisconsin's state cemeteries or a national cemetery. There is an eligibility process. And in this case, he's being treated by the VA, which means they've already determined that he is a veteran who is eligible for treatment. He dies in their care. So that eligibility, I wouldn't imagine, would have been a very difficult process. But once that determination is made, then yes, arrangements are supposed to be made and the burial is supposed to happen within a timely fashion. There's nothing that I'm aware of that is set down in statute or federal code that says how long that process should take. So it's not clear if it's got to happen by this amount of time. But I think the expectation is it will happen as soon as reasonably possible, so that you don't have someone's remains just deteriorating in a funeral home.
So Nicole didn't even know, though, that her father had passed away.
She had no idea.
And found out at a family gathering, right?
And I'll say, I will point out, I've read some comments to this story, and people have said, well, isn't that on her for not being in touch with her father, or for family not knowing? How do you not know that your dad is in the hospital, that he's in that kind of condition? And that may be a reasonable question to ask. I think if you look at the system as a whole, there are tens of thousands of veterans who die in the VA's care across the country every year. And it is inevitable there are going to be some who have been estranged from family for one reason or another, by their own cause or something else. Or there are some who are going to be without family members that are still around, or those who are not eligible, or I should say able to take them. This is one of those cases where there was family, there'd been some estrangement. Nicole says her dad when he was well mentally, he was good and he wanted to be around family. But he had mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And she said when he wasn't good, he would make himself distant. He would keep family at arm's length. So what she would do is she'd check in on him from time to time. She would even check in with his social worker and say, you don't have to tell him I called. I just want to know how he's doing. Can you let me know? He might be angry if I'm checking in, so just, tell me how he's doing. And she said that, but then, you get busy. Life happens. Time goes on. She hadn't checked in for a while. She's at Easter dinner with family in Michigan, and a family member says, hey, how's your dad doing? Have you talked to him in a while? She goes, actually, I haven't. It's been a while. It might have even been 2 or 3 years. And she said, let's see what we can find out. And whether it was Nicole herself who found this or another family member, I've heard differing stories on this, but someone goes searching online to see what they can find out about Billy Ford, and they find Billy Ford with the same date of birth also has a date of death listed on a death notice on this Foster's Funeral and Cremation Service website. And so now they realize that's Dad, and Dad has passed away. She says that was gut-wrenching to find out that way. But then she sees on the website that he's buried at Rock Island National Cemetery. Final resting place, Rock Island National Cemetery. So the next step for the family is, we want to go pay our respects. And that's when she decides to call the funeral home, and this story takes a whole other turn.
Okay, so she reaches out to the funeral home. I'm assuming she had a lot of questions. Did she find out anything from them?
Well, she calls because what she wanted to know is, okay, you say it's at the cemetery, but this is a huge national cemetery. How do I find my dad? We want to go and lay flowers. We want to go and pay our respects. And she says what she's told when she calls and speaks to a staff member there. I believe the staff member's name was Bernie. Bernie tells her, actually, you're in luck. We haven't buried him yet. We just got approval for eligibility to bury him in the National Cemetery last week. So we're still going to have the funeral. And guess what? You can be there. And so Nicole tells me while she's concerned that her father's been sitting in a funeral home now for more than 4 months, there's a part of her that goes, actually, this is kind of good because we can be there to say goodbye. And so she tells me that she asks at the time, can I come see him? I'd like to do a viewing. This is my father. And they said, sorry, too much time has passed. The condition he would be in, it would be emotionally very difficult. So no. And she says, okay, you guys say you've already started the process. You've got the approval to bury him at this cemetery. It's already underway. In that case, you handle it. We'll step back. Just let us know when to be there. But then weeks go by and months go by, and she keeps calling, and they tell her, well, we're busy with funerals and there's too much else going on, and she's not getting any response. She calls the cemetery in Rock Island, and they say, we have no record of your father here or any plans to bury him here. So she's growing more and more concerned. Finally, in July, someone from the funeral home tells her, there's a holdup. We're waiting on payment from the VA. And she says, no one's mentioned payment up to this point. You just said we're waiting on a burial date. We're waiting on a transport date. And now it's July. I think this is 8 months after he's passed and 3 or 4 months after she first came forward. And they're saying we're waiting on payment. So she calls the VA and she talks to them about it. And a few more months go by as they're trying to figure out what's going on here. And she's been working with someone at the VA by the name of Genevieve Calderon. Genevieve Calderon says, I'm working on this. I'm going to see what I can do. She asks Genevieve, why didn't you contact me? And she says, well, he was living with someone at the time. And that's who we contacted. And that person didn't know how to reach family. So this drags on. Finally, October comes around. She calls the cemetery again. They still have no idea that her father is supposed to be buried there, even though it says not only on the website, it says on his death certificate that he's buried at this place. And it's said this since December. So there are records out there that say he's buried in a place and he's not.
Right.
Yeah.
And she finally says, I need some help with this. And that's when she called us.
Okay, so she wrote to Fox 6, you said in October.
Correct.
So you reached out to the funeral home director. Did you get any new information that she hadn't heard yet?
I did. In fact, when I called and explained who I was and why I was calling, Brian Foster, who is the funeral director of Foster's Funeral and Cremation Service, got right on the phone. Mm-hmm. And the first thing he said to me was, I was just basically waiting for the government to pay me. But you know what? I'm going to take care of my veteran. I'm going to pay for this one on my own. So we're going to bury him. We're going to schedule this thing right away. And he actually told me he was going to schedule it for the following week, Halloween, October 31st. He said, I don't like doing it on Halloween, but I think I can get it done that day. So, let me see about that. Well, maybe I'll try to avoid Halloween. And I said, I'll tell you what, I don't think you should be telling me this.
Right.
Yeah,
I think you should talk to Nicole Ford and the family and schedule this appropriate burial. Well, what ends up happening is, and this wasn't in the on-air story, by the way, so this is why I love the podcast. What ends up happening is they schedule it for the following Tuesday. I'm talking to him on a Thursday or Friday, and they schedule it for the following Tuesday. And he didn't tell the family that. I tell the family. And then they say, what, Tuesday? We have family in Michigan. They can't get here. There's no note. It's been, how many months now, and we haven't had time to plan this. So Nicole calls the funeral home and the VA and says, what's going on? And so in the end, she finally says, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm going to claim the body. I'm going to hire a funeral home. We're going to bring him out. We're going to just come get my dad.
Yeah.
But one more thing concerned her, and that was, how do I know they actually still have him? It's been this long. She was actually concerned when I first interviewed her. What if maybe that's not my dad? What if they harvested his organs? What if, how do I know they're not going to just give me some other body? And I'm not suggesting the funeral home ever planned to do that, but that's what's going through her mind. So she says, can I, again, come view the body? She shows up at the funeral home, comes in, and they tell her, again, he's too far gone. You can't see him. So she calls the VA and says, I need some way to know this is my dad. And they actually worked out a method of him getting a photograph. He had to do some work, he said, using chemicals to actually draw out a tattoo on the body that she was able to identify. And ultimately they confirmed, yes, this is your father. So they scheduled the funeral for the following week, November 6th, and family came in for that. But during that process, you can imagine she was frustrated, concerned, and obviously really upset that they were, at one time she was told, it's going to happen next Tuesday, whether you can be there or not.
And with the burial being on November 6th, the funeral director was there, and
he was.
But so was Fox 6.
Yeah. I talked to Brian Foster after this funeral. And by the way, it's the first time I've been to a military burial, and it was a wonderful thing to see. They had the rifle corps, they had the full regiment, the flag presentation. It was poignant, but afterwards I wanted to talk to Brian Foster about why it took this long. And that's when he said something I was not expecting. And we will talk about that when we come back right after this.
We are back on Open Record. U.S. Marines veteran Billy Ford died in November of 2023, but his body was kept in a funeral home morgue for 11 months until a call from the Fox 6 investigators. Brian, you talked to the funeral director last week after the funeral for Billy Ford. Did he explain to you what caused the long delay?
When I talked to him on the phone the first time, remember, he said, first thing out of his mouth was, I've been waiting on the government to pay me. And that is what he had told, or someone on his staff had told Nicole Ford back in July. So that matched up. And when I talked to the VA, in fact, They ultimately sent me a statement and answered some questions. And one of the things they said was there was a clerical error on their end that caused a delay in payment. The federal government does pay. They reimburse funeral homes for burying and for funeral services for unclaimed veterans. It's a small stipend. I think it's $700 for the burial itself.
But it did send that money?
They had held that money up, or it had been held up at that time through some administrative, bureaucratic red tape. Whatever it was, there was a problem with the payment process. So all along, there's three different sources of information: what he told Nicole, what he told me, what the VA is telling me. So I'm interviewing him at the burial site, and I asked just on camera for the first time, tell me what happened. Why did this take 11 months? Expecting him to say, well, there was a payment issue. I shouldn't have let it go on this long. Whatever. I didn't know what he was going to say. And what he said was, you know, Brian, actually, it wasn't about the payment. And before he continued, inside, I'm thinking, what? Are you kidding? You've said all along that's what it was. He was changing his story. And I thought, okay, let's see where he goes with this. And what he said was, Brian, what I actually wanted to do is I just had a gut feeling that somebody was going to come forward. In other words, he's saying I held on to this body. I let it deteriorate in my funeral home cooler because I thought there might be the off chance a family member who we had no idea existed might come out of the woodwork. And hey, look, that's what happened. So he actually said, so this is a good thing. This was a great day for the family. I did ask Nicole Ford about that afterwards, by the way. I said, he says this was a great day for the family. What do you think? And she said, well, I'm glad it happened. I feel like my father's at peace now, but it shouldn't have taken this long. And I think she would have preferred he be laid to rest with dignity right away, and they miss it, than go 11 months sitting around like that and then have family be there. I think in her view, this was not a favor that the funeral home did for them, but Brian Foster is suggesting it is.
She had a wonderful way of reacting
She sure
to
did.
that new information.
Yeah.
She communicated so much with just like her eyes and her facial expression. How did you think she reacted to that new bit of news? How did you interpret?
This is where I'm going to ask Dave, our editor, to in the podcast, to drop in a quick snippet of this.
He did this for you.
It's a crock of
I explained that Brian Foster is saying he did this for you. This was a favor to you. And she says
It's a crock of
she doesn't buy that for a minute, especially because of all of the delays. Family came forward in April. If he was waiting for family to come out of the woodwork and come forward, then why not bury him in April? Why wait until May, June, July? Tell her it's about a payment issue. August, September, October. Tell me it's a payment issue. And then change your story and say, no. I was just hoping family would come forward. It seems as though he was trying to sort of change the story to, in the end, they got what they wanted. See, this was a good thing.
So obviously there's a process. So if you're a veteran and you're in VA care and you pass away, there's a process to get to the very end. Is there a bigger challenge, a bigger problem with the system as a whole?
Well, and I think that's where that initial Inspector General's report that Nicole sent me raises questions about whether the VA system is doing a good enough job in follow-up, in next of kin notification. That's one of the things that was cited by the Office of Inspector General was next of kin notification leaves a lot to be desired. The VA is not one monolith. It is broken up into a lot of different systems and departments. There's the Veterans Hospital Administration, there's the National Cemetery Association, there's Veterans Benefits, and they don't always talk to each other very well. And there's some concerns that were expressed in that report a few years ago that there is a significant amount of overlap in terms of responsibility and maybe disconnect in who's responsible for which piece. One thing's clear here. Nicole Ford has been in Milwaukee the whole time, and no one found her.
Yeah.
Why? That's a question that maybe there are some answers that the VA can't speak to. They did say there are some privacy issues. They can't speak to some things about the next of kin notification process. Whatever that means, Nicole knows no one contacted her. No one contacted any of the other family members. He had children from two different wives, both ex-wives, both interested. Neither heard anything. So there's the next of kin question. But I have a bigger question, which is beyond the next of kin. You've handed a body off to a funeral home. Is there any responsibility for the VA to continue following up on that and going, have you buried him yet? Do we have
you reached
proof?
someone?
Has he
Yes.
actually been laid to rest, or is he just sitting around waiting? And I don't know if it's because the VA staffing they're just overwhelmed. There's a lot of responsibility. If it's not clear whose responsibility that follow-up is. The VA did tell me that they've made several phone calls to the funeral home over the past year. What the content of those calls were, I don't know. The National Cemetery Association is required to follow up weekly once a burial is once eligibility is determined. Did they follow up weekly? Did they follow up at all? The VA hasn't yet answered that for me. So there's some real concerns about follow-up here. And this affects as many as 300 to 400 veterans every year who are ultimately deemed unclaimed.
Well, and it's one thing too to see it on the death notice online. That's fine. But then the actual death certificate to also list where he's buried without ever clearly any real follow.
I don't really know what Brian Foster in Madison's connection is to the National Cemetery in Rock Island, Illinois. There are veteran cemeteries in Wisconsin, but for whatever reason, if he wants to put him in a national cemetery, there's that one and there's one in Joliet that are open and active. So he may just view coming from Madison that it's easier to get to the one in Rock Island. He obviously has an ongoing relationship there. He's buried. I talked to the people there at the National Cemetery. They think highly of Brian Foster and his funeral service, and they say that he has buried a number of veterans here over the years. Typically, because they're unclaimed, it's Brian Foster who receives the flag. It's Brian Foster who's there because there's no family. This was a rare case where an unclaimed veteran turned into someone whose family had come to the service. He said he's never seen that before. Brian Foster actually said he's never. And that's part of what makes me a little bit suspicious, that because he'd never seen it before, maybe there was no sense of urgency to bury an unclaimed veteran that no one's coming around for. I'll get around to it when they pay me. I don't know if that's the case. That's certainly what comes to mind. What I'm still not clear on is when the family does come forward in April of 2024, earlier this year, why another 7 months before he's finally buried? And, if it is a matter of payment, why is the VA dragging its feet and taking that long? They did apologize. They said, we regret any negative impact on the family here. We regret what they've been through, and they're working on making changes to ensure this doesn't happen again. They're auditing their records to make sure the other veterans that they have turned over to Brian Foster have in fact been buried. I haven't gotten a response yet to determine they've confirmed that, but they said they are checking into that.
So we know the family was really unhappy with how this was all handled, but that doesn't always mean that it's not legal how this was handled.
Yeah.
Are there any laws that govern how long the funeral home can hold on to these unclaimed remains?
That's a good question. I tried researching that, and I even talked to the director of the Wisconsin the Wisconsin Funeral Directors Association, and it's not clear if there is any law that says how long you can hold on to remains in general. In terms of veterans remains, unclaimed veterans, there is a state law. And actually, the Wisconsin American Legion, we're going to have a guest on in just a moment who's going to talk to us about this. But the Wisconsin American Legion was in part responsible for legislation in 2015 that created a law that says if you have veterans' remains in a funeral home, you must either bury them or turn over the cremated remains within 90 days to the Veterans Administration, to the Department of Veterans Affairs, rather, or to a veteran service organization like the American Legion, so that they can work on getting the proper burial. But that specifically refers to cremated remains. It does not refer to what happened in this case, and that was Brian Foster did not cremate Billy Ford's body. So it appears there was no law that applied to that one. Though, as I mentioned, the Wisconsin American Legion was behind that 2015 law. It, in fact, now has an unclaimed veterans task force, and that all came about because of the work of a man named Steve Conto. I am excited to say we have Navy veteran and Wisconsin Legionnaire Steve Conto as a guest. He will join us on Open Record right after the break. And we are back on Open Record, and we have a special guest this week. I am excited and thrilled to welcome Navy veteran, member of the Wisconsin American Legion's Unclaimed Veterans Task Force, the chair, in fact, of that task force, Steve Conto. Steve, thank you so much for being here on Open Record.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Steve, I want to start with how this task force came about, because this all, as I understand it, started with your work on identifying veterans killed in action in the Vietnam War. Tell me a little bit about that and how that led to this task force.
Well, I was doing research to find the burial site of Terrence's son, and I come to find out that he was held in the North Room at the Wisconsin Memorial Park in Brookfield. I found out later through research that this was due to the family's wishes for the family members to be not have a service. So they all were kept there, including the mother and father. I was able to contact a family member, his sister Sue. She gave me authorization at the time that I could get him intern, him and his mother, on the grounds there in the veterans section in a niche. I was able to raise the funds. We had a very nice formal ceremony in August of 2015 to have Terrence and his mother interned there on the grounds. And his dad was being him a veteran. He was interned at the Southern Wisconsin Veterans Memorial Cemetery near Union Grove. And then from that, the American Legion spearheaded a law to get passed for other unclaimed veterans' cremated remains that they would be buried or interned. And that came Act 382 and was passed in April 2016. So from that point with Terrence action with him, we were able to bury or intern well over 100 unclaimed veterans.
Steve, I know that the creation of this comes about because of that work. What have you seen since then? Is this an ongoing issue in Wisconsin and across the country? Is there a concern that there are unclaimed veterans' remains that are sitting, well, in this case with Terrence Sund, he was in Wisconsin Memorial Park, but just in that room with his ashes. In the case of Billy Ford, you have uncremated remains just languishing in a funeral home, deteriorating in a funeral home cooler. Is this a bigger problem than one or two cases?
Oh, yes. If I could maybe relate a little bit with Billy Ford, normally what happens is that they are turned over to either the funeral home and work in conjunction with the County Veteran Service Office. And they go with about approximately 90 days of trying to locate next of kin. If they don't find any, they are cremated. And then through the Act 382, the funeral home or the County Veteran Service Office, or if they wish to reach out to a veteran organization like ourselves, they get them screened to be buried in one of our state cemeteries or a national cemetery. And then from there, they set up the date and time for burial. But they are cremated after the 90-day mark, and it makes it much easier to work with the individual that way.
Why do you think that didn't happen here? Is there a requirement that after 90 days they be cremated, or is that the typical process?
That's a typical process. It's not a requirement at all.
I know Brian, for what it's worth, Brian Foster did tell me he doesn't cremate the remains because he believes that he shouldn't. He believes that doing it the way he does is a service to the veterans. Brian Foster himself is a veteran. So I just wanted to include that. But in this case, the way the law is written, Steve, it says that those cremated remains have to be turned over after 90 days. Do you think that is something that might need to be addressed? Because in this case, it allowed Billy Ford to sit around much longer because he's not cremated, so the law doesn't seem to apply.
Yeah, we might want to change that in the future. I was talking with my state commander that we would add just remains, and that would encompass then both cremated and uncremated, full body.
Steve, I'm interested in your thoughts on Billy Ford's case. When you heard about it, did it seem particularly egregious to you, or did it seem similar to what you've already heard many times before?
Well, this one here is unique, and yes, it very much bothers us. This is totally unacceptable as a veteran, and I can speak on behalf of our organization that we wish to give honor as expeditiously as possible after a veteran has passed away.
You've been on this task force. I think you said you've chaired this now for 8 years. Can you talk about some of the work that the task force has done in that time for veterans in Wisconsin?
Oh my. Well, we have worked with several different scenarios that have popped up where we've been notified. We have been notified of one that was found in a suitcase in a landfill that was discarded by the family. They threw all their stuff out, and they were able to find that individual who she was by the cremation tag on the bag. We've had them, actually a husband and wife were found in a trailer on their property that went in the rears, and they repossessed the trailer and found the remains and brought them back to the funeral home. And we both got the husband and the wife buried at one of our state cemeteries. And it's to be noted that we pay for the spouse's burial on that. The cost that is incurred, that is brought out from our Terrence Sund Memorial Fund, where we use that to pay for her. We've had them, actually another one found in an apartment, and we were able to hook up that individual's cremated remains with the family and return it to the family.
Where does your money come from? Do you get private fundraising or do you have funding from other means?
Yeah, it's private fundraising and donations to the Terrence Sun Memorial Fund. The American Legion established this fund 8 years ago to have that for any cost incurment, and mostly it was just administrative fees. And now, if we need be, if there's a cremation, we will pay for it at cost, and this is through the medical examiners. We've had done that, and we even worked closely with the funeral homes to pay for it as well. In regards to the cost factor, we really mitigated it down.
Steve, this might seem like a silly question, but I just want to hear from you. Why is it so important to take care of these late veterans like your task force is doing?
Well, no veteran that served our country should take his final ride, his final journey alone. They deserve more than to be placed on a shelf, be kept to the side. They had the same, they took the same oath that we all took, to defend our country. They are willing to risk their lives the same as all of us. Every one of us deserves that dignity of the formal military burial. And that's why this task force is very passionate of mine, that we give this honor to those individuals.
Steve, in this particular case, you mentioned that the normal process involves the funeral home receiving the remains and then working with a county veteran service officer for 90 days to try and locate next of kin. When I talked to Brian Foster in this case, I asked him, when he made his comment that he had a gut feeling family was going to come forward, I asked him, what did you do to try to find family? And he said nothing. We had nothing to go on. I'm wondering, is that again one of those where that's the typical process? Does there need to be, in your view, some sort of a regulation or a law that says you need to be making these efforts, or here's a minimum you need to do? Or is it just some people will make that effort and some people won't?
It almost seems like what you just said. Some will and some won't. There isn't really a law under Act 382, and just reading that they say if cremated remains are not claimed within 90 days, the cremation, the contact the Department of County Veteran Service Officer. I believe that funeral homes should make every means to locate family members, whether it be the County Veteran Service Office. There has to be a file there, and the VA itself that had the possessions of the individual to begin with. They did. They were doing the care. Now, this case with Billy, he came from Michigan. I'm not sure with that being the case if he with the paperwork there, but I feel that should always been on file that family members and next of kin, and each step of the way. I don't know what happened there. Like I said, the clerical error occurred. I don't know. It's hard to speculate on it, but yes, they should have exhausted every means to contact a next of kin.
You mentioned the Terrence Sun Memorial Fund. I understand there is an annual motorcycle ride in support of that. Can you talk about some of the things that are done to support that fund?
Oh, wow. That was the first one that was done. It was all the No Next of Kin fundraiser, that they had a motorcycle ride with the Conomowoc American Legion. And it was the first one we had. It was wonderful. They raised several $1,000s for the fund. We also have currently the Wisconsin Elks Association. It has a special program that they're raising funds for this as well. So, yeah, this has been wonderful donations.
And you mentioned the Final Bridge. That was the project that started all of this, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the Final Bridge?
The Final Bridge is my personal legacy program. I started 22 years ago finding the grave sites of the guys who killed in Vietnam. And I just find not just the grave site, but the exact location, column, row, section, call it the crosshairs of finding the individuals. The reason why I did this, there was back then no central record on them. They were always pointing fingers between the state and county of who had the records, and then some didn't, either of them didn't have any records on them. So I started my own program of finding them, or doing my research. I made an Excel spreadsheet on these individuals. If they had any connection to the state of Wisconsin that were killed in action in Vietnam, they're on my list. And a little over 10 years ago, the Department of Veterans Affairs in Madison made my list official record.
Steve, last thing I want to ask you is a chance for you to tell us a little bit about your service.
Well, my service, I was 22 years Navy. I joined in 1976, retired in 1998. I was advanced to Chief Petty Officer in 1989. I'm a veteran of Operation Desert Shield. And from there, I just, like I said, been very active after my retirement in various veterans organizations, and then my personal legacy work with the Final Bridge.
Well, Steve Conto, chairman of the Wisconsin American Legion Unclaimed Veterans Task Force. Thank you very much for your service, and thank you for being here on Open Record.
Thank you all for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, we will take a break. We will go off the record when we come right back. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question for which we have done no preparation, unless your name is Sarah Smith, who has the question for us.
It's me.
Right here.
I feel like I do that every week. That's so dumb. Okay, so I feel like we're all pretty comfortable with each other, right? Like
Sure.
we
Sure,
can
yeah, absolutely.
talk to us,
Yeah.
each other about stuff. But can you get too comfortable in the workplace? There's a growing debate online if it's okay for people to walk around in their socks in the office.
I was worried about where this was going, so I'm glad it's
Wait, are there people doing this? Is this a trend?
It's a thing that could be a thing. Some people obviously see it as inconsiderate. Some people are like, yeah, you do you. It's just like being
Does it
inside
matter?
my house.
Does it matter the time of day? Like if you're like the weekend crew or the overnight crew and you're walking around in your socks, is that different from like, 10 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon?
I would argue that you're never really alone in this building.
Right.
No, but I mean, there's like, is there a different level of expectation of sort of professionalism when it's your side? Yeah, I don't know. I'm just
that's
pondering.
fair.
I'm not saying it's true.
No,
I'm just
that's
asking.
fair. I don't. It's still no. But look, if
I
you
think what
want
we're
to
hearing
bring,
is Sarah's got a pet peeve.
Yeah.
well,
She doesn't
no,
want
it's
you
not
in
a pet
socks.
peeve. I'm just saying if you want to bring like slippers or like
I was
indoor
just thinking the
shoes
same
or
thing.
something,
I think I'd be okay with
I'd be
that.
okay with that. But I don't know that I want you walking around like.
I mostly just find it yucky. I mean,
Yes.
like the whole germ thing. Everyone's coming
Yes.
from all sorts of different places.
Yes.
The bottom of the shoes.
The bottom of the shoes. Yeah.
But the bottom of the shoes are already so okay, wait a minute though. The bottom of the shoes are the stuff that has the gross stuff on it, and you're wearing shoes in the building.
now you're
no,
going
but
in
now
the
you're going to go
socks.
in just your socks or
Yeah, but
worse.
they're your
yes.
socks.
But then you
You're not-
might go home and like put your socks up on an ottoman or something.
Right,
Like
okay.
transferring of all
Okay,
the
but
dirty,
that's a
gross
personal
stuff.
risk, not a social risk, because I'm not taking those
But
socks
there are-
and then rubbing them
There
on
are
people.
like social norms, aren't there? Like,
no, it's true.
I think it
Being
would be weird.
considerate.
I'm going to be
Okay.
honest. I think it's weird unless you like went onto a scene. If you're a reporter whose shoes got soaked covering a flood or something,
Fair.
that makes sense. But aside from that, I think I would
Like,
find it
just to
weird
be
if one
more
of our
comfortable.
producers
I
was
am
just
I am
walking around in
not
his socks.
disagreeing with you guys on the weirdness. I was just attacking if the reasoning is germs. I don't think it's germs. I think it's just that
that's
it's
like
uncomfortable.
that's like a
yeah.
tier of what makes it not acceptable.
No, I mean, you said socks. You didn't go the next step. Is there somebody walking around barefoot in the? Because
That's
is,
a fireable offense.
Right. Exactly.
Call up
Truly.
HR.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's
Do you think there are people in our building who are too comfortable? Like, are there things?
I don't know.
Nothing like immediately comes
what
to
about
mind.
like if you have your
We're
own
not
office?
naming names, are we?
No,
Okay.
I mean like I know
His name
we're more
rhymes with
casual
Ryan
than a lot of-
Rolston.
Yeah.
I still have socks on.
Yeah.
No, but you know what? This is a funny thing because I have an office that has no windows, that has one door,
Yes.
sort of isolated, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if I were sitting at my desk and I take my shoes off because they're a little tight, and I'm saying that's fine. But you're
No,
saying
it's
get up and
fine.
walk around,
Yeah.
put the shoes back on.
Right. If you have to walk into the newsroom to get something off the printer, let's just
Now,
say.
my office, you guys have been in there. It gets really warm.
is so hot in there.
I'm wearing, say I'm coming in with a suit. Right? I have a suit on and I have the suit shirt and I'm like, it's really hot. And sometimes I will take that off and be in the t-shirt that's underneath
That's
it.
fine.
That's
But
okay.
does that look a little too comfortable then?
No,
Nobody cares.
because it's 85,000 degrees in your
Correct.
office.
Right,
So
yes.
if you're doing it just to like be cooler, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
What about
you mean
other-
to be cooler, not to be
Not
cooler?
to be cooler.
Yeah, right, yeah. Okay. I'm not
what
showing
about
off the
other
guns.
workplace things like I know we've talked about like warming up food. like
I-
smelly food.
yeah,
but
I mean,
we
I-
always have smelly food in this building just
Yeah.
because of all the cooking segments.
That's
Brian
true.
and I are right next to the
Yeah,
studio.
that's
we
true.
smell,
You
but I
smell
think
it.
it's
I
been
get it
cooked.
because that's on the air, so you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
But when you bring lunch and if it's like salmon,
See, and I'm okay. I'm
okay
an
with
offender.
it.
I bring it. I don't even care. What are they gonna do? I got the girls got to
what
eat.
are they gonna do?
And
I'm
if
a
I make
manager.
salmon to bring in, that's the. I didn't say that. I didn't say I'm a manager, but I am. But I don't have a problem with that. The other problem I have is people crunching their food loudly. I know we've talked about that
Oh
before.
yeah, I do. It's not just crunching. To me, it's lip smacking. It's
all.
that is for me. If it's audible, then it's too much.
Well, I would say though, our newsroom has a lot more noises than most workplaces because
That's-
it's built to be like a social environment. Like we
Yes,
don't have
it's an open
cubicles.
space.
We're open
Right,
and
right,
talking
right.
all the time. I have developed the ability to block out anything
see,
because of working
good
in
on
this
you.
building. I could be working at home with my kids running around and I can totally block them out. So those little sounds they
Teach me
wouldn't
your
bother
ways,
me
because-
you just when you're on deadline and you have to write that script in
That's
20
true.
minutes.
You've got to block.
I
Yeah,
know.
everyone
you gotta
else
learn
around
to
you.
block it all out.
They're not on deadline, so they're all joking around, and you're focused. And you've got that's true. You've got to be able to do that.
Right.
Oh, but
So
you've got to do that in a
those things
live
don't bug
environment
me.
too. There's people, hey, newsman,
Yeah,
are
yeah,
you ready? You're
yeah.
getting ready for your live shot and you're
Newsman.
trying to type, and right. So that's another thing. Dave's got you've got a great little spot back there where you can shut the door to your edit bay and block the world out if you want to, right?
I do, but I don't. There are definitely days because I'm in a really high traffic area
Yes,
Where-
everyone always wants to stop
where
by.
it turns into like a psychiatrist's office.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I know it's
like
true.
person after person.
true.
Next thing you know, 45 minutes has gone by and you haven't done a damn thing.
My Dave edit bay time outside his edit bay time is sometimes like morning therapy.
Yeah.
Because I've got my hot cup of coffee, so I wander back to say hello to Dave. We talk about a couple of things. We might talk about things that are totally not work related, then a couple of things that are work related. Then he goes, "Hey, take a look at this," and he plays me a video.
Yeah.
And we make fun of the video and
Yeah.
whatever it is. And I've gone on for about 10 or 15 minutes, and the conversation, Dave, how does the conversation usually end? What do I say?
I got to go back to get some work done.
I got to go get some work done. I better go get some work done. So yeah, that's pretty common.
It's usually it's a Dave where I'm like, hey bud, I need this, and then it'll be like, oh, and one more thing, oh, and another thing. It's not things I need, but things that I need to just get off my chest.
But you know what? Here's the thing. Now, I know that's maybe 10 or 15 minutes I stand there talking to Dave and you go, well, that's unproductive. And that's why when the pandemic happened, we thought, oh, we're all going to be so much more productive at home because we don't have all those distractions. But then you have the home distractions.
Yeah.
And then you have well, you know what? Since I'm here, I could go let the dogs out and fill their bowls, and I'm doing other things. And there's
Dinner
always,
prep,
there's another
laundry
distraction
loads, yeah.
that happens. I also have to say, and I know this wasn't the topic. This is topic creep again, but the being here to collaborate. Really,
Yes.
I'm 100% bought back into the importance of being here to collaborate because it was really hard to be at home and not have people to bounce things off of.
Sure.
And we're very social beings by nature, I feel like,
Well, it's-
in this business.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so to be by yourself in your house and only available via Zoom or a phone call is always, it felt.
But Dave, I know you edit at home too. Is there a part of you that it's good to be here, or do you go, no, if I could just be home every day, I would just rather do that?
Oh no, it's definitely good to be here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. All right.
It's also good that I stop by his office so much and shoot the poop because then when I need something, I'll be like, hey, hey, remember that time we just talked a lot?
You sidle up, he thinks it's non-threatening.
I know, yeah.
And that's when the door gets closed.
Yeah.
Right. I'm now realizing I stand in a queue for your office a lot of the time, actually.
Yeah.
Dave.
Yeah.
You got to
Yeah.
give us a signal when you need us to go, like a polite
He
signal.
needs those like at the doctor's office where they have like a yellow tab, a green tab,
Yeah.
and then he just needs to be like, red, stay away.
I just think he needs the thing that Lucy has
Yeah.
in Peanuts, the thing, the therapist is
and
in,
a
or
QR
whatever it is.
code so that we can send him money.
All right. Well, we are going to take a break and wrap things up here on Open Record when we come right back.
Honored, trusted, respected. The Fox 6 investigators.
We are Milwaukee's investigative team.
Because you matter.
The one thing that we're going to do from now on is Dave's going to cut in that, he's going to cut in Nicole Ford saying that's a crock of bleep whenever I say something on this podcast that is not acceptable.
It's a crock of
So we have something new for the podcast. This is a good one. Steve's content was fantastic.
Yeah,
wasn't
this
it?
is an interesting story.
Well, it's got emotions tied up in it too. That family obviously really cared about this person, even though they were estranged, and that happens.
Yeah.
So-
Well, glad it ended the way it did. At least Billy Ford has been laid to rest with military honors. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible. Executive producer Sarah Smith. Contact 6 is Genesis X. Thank you.
Sure.
And of course, always our executive producer. Well, I just said it.
That's
Our executive
me.
producer.
He's gonna thank
Let's say
you
her
guys.
again. Let's say it again. She's my boss, so we're gonna say it as many times as possible.
No.
Also, our editor Dave Machuda and our chief photographer Kale Zimney. With that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.